average and near perfect SAT scores, and the good sense to only misbehave in proportion to what my parents would be able to forgive because I was usually so good. So on top of that, I also had a stable and loving family, a beautiful house in a safe neighborhood, parents who made good money and sent me and my brother to private schools in the suburbs, a Unitarian Universalist congregation that loved me and anchored me. I had the whole package. But somewhere toward the end of my adolescent years, I started noticing this ache somewhere deep inside of me. It wasn't pain. Even though my life was really good, I knew what pain was, and this wasn't it. It was more like emptiness. A slow creeping hunger that begins to make your belly growl little by little, slowly at first, until at one moment you realize that you are famished. For me, that realization came during the winter of my senior year of high school. I remember the moment that I first really paid attention to the empty ache. I was driving home after school one evening after rehearsal for something, and I dropped my friends off, and then I was driving down Fairview Avenue in St. Paul, and it just hit me. My soul was starving. Not for physical nourishment, of course, but for something deeper, for something that manifested almost like a physical sensation. And I pulled over to the side of the road, and I just sat there, my 1985 Pontiac Parisienne from my grandmother. And I sat there trying to find the words for this deep yearning for something that I couldn't quite express. I didn't solve the riddle on my way home that night, but over the next several weeks, I found myself getting really edgy. So I was annoyed with everybody. My homework seemed pointless. All of the activities that motivated me to get out of bed in the morning suddenly seemed shallow and meaningless. And then one afternoon in December, this is my senior year of high school, I see this big fat envelope in the mail with the seal of Harvard University in the upper corner. And there was this sinking feeling in my stomach as I tore that manila paper, and then right there on the heavyweight ivory paper were the words, "Dear Ms. Horan, we're pleased to inform you that you have been accepted as part of the class of 2004. And I burst into tears. Sometimes when I think back to that day, I get really judgmental with myself. I think, how unbelievably ungrateful of me. How could I have reacted to this thing that most people only dream of with anything less than joy and total gratitude? And all of that is true. But at the same time, when I'm gentle with that person who I was at 17, I know that this was more than spoiled brat teen angst. In that moment, as I looked head on at this gift of being admitted into one of the world's finest schools, and everything that would follow from that, I knew deep down within me that even that was not going to fix the ache inside of me. And that was terrifying. If such a gift couldn't give me what I yearned for, would I ever be able to find it? I couldn't describe what I was hungry for, but I knew that I wasn't likely to find it if I just kept on following the path laid out in front of me without stopping to look around and see where else I might go, what other destinations I might head toward, who else might walk with me. There's something about being a teenager that makes it socially acceptable to have this kind of deep yearning. I know, for example, from experience, because this week we welcomed our daughter into teenage years at our house, and we are hearing a lot about her yearnings for the world. This is a phase of human development during which teens get restless. They sense that there is something more to being alive, more exciting, more fulfilling than what they have known so far. They cycle through friends quickly, trying on new people like clothes to see which ones fit. They experiment with sex and drugs and rock and roll, trying to try on a new kind of consciousness. They dream about the future, imagining what their jobs and their families will look like, and generally we see this as a healthy part of growing up. But beyond those few years when we expect youth to be finding themselves, we're not very comfortable with yearning, or at least unfulfilled yearning. We're told that if as adults we are still yearning for something, we should be actively doing something to fill the void. Do you feel unloved? Well, then find a partner. Have some kids. Feel like your work isn't feeding your soul? Then do some volunteer work. Make a career change. If you feel unrooted, you can just go buy yourself a home, get to know your neighbors. Feel a sense of financial insecurity? Well then, 1-800-LOSE-THAT-DEBT will help you out. The solutions are neat and easy, and they're usually available from some brand-named retailer or self-help book or life coach. But the problem with the fix-it-fast mentality is that they're solutions that do not actually answer the question, what are you yearning for? They're solutions to the question, what do you want? Wanting and yearning are two very different things. Wanting is about the things we desire to fill the void, and yearning is about the shape of the void itself. When we're asked what we want in life, we might very well answer, I want a spouse and 3 kids and a nice house and a job that pays well and interests me. But when we're asked what we yearn for, the answers are much deeper. I yearn to feel unconditional love. I yearn to feel deeply rooted in a community. I yearn to walk confidently in my own gifts and skills and put them to use in service of the greater good. I yearn to know that life has meaning, that we are not all characters in some vast cosmic joke. I yearn to know that I'm going to be okay. Every religious and philosophical tradition throughout time has grappled with that question of yearning. The 4th century Christian theologian and Bishop Augustine begins his masterwork, Confessions, by crying out to God, "Our souls are restless until they rest in thee." He speaks of agitation, a sort of under the skin itching that makes us keep moving and seeking, always searching for something more. And then 12 centuries later, the French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal wrote, "There is a God-shaped hollow in the heart of every person, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by the Creator." The vacuum he describes is like a vast echoing cavern, too big to be filled no matter how many odds and ends you pile within it. But whether or not that theistic language works for you, I think the images are powerful. It was that sort of Augustinian itching that I felt at 17, something like restless soul syndrome. I couldn't quiet it down. And I've had many periods of Pascal-like hollowness in my life, when I felt deeply lonely or aimless or even hopeless, when I would have done anything to fill up that echo chamber inside of me. I bet that most of you can look back and remember those yearning times in your own lives. Maybe it was your own period of late adolescent angst. Maybe it was when you knew you couldn't stay in your marriage, or you needed treatment, or when you finally admitted you hated your job but you couldn't leave it, or when you realized that your relationship with your mom or your brother or your child was irrevocably broken. If you're like me, thinking back on those periods kind of creates a tension in my body when I think about it. So check in with your own body as you think back to a yearning moment. Maybe you're in that moment now. Do you feel a little clench in your stomach or an itch of the skin? It's not very pleasant. Yearning, it turns out, is not a very nice feeling. But it's that agitation and emptiness that are part and parcel of the yearning experience. And so it's no wonder that our culture freely prescribes muscle relaxants for that restless soul syndrome, that our society prefers hoarding to hollowness. We try to suppress our deepest longings because to name them would be, number one, to acknowledge that we are not completely whole yet, and number two, to face the possibility that we might never be. Naming our yearnings and learning how to sit with them is a spiritual discipline. It can be deeply uncomfortable at first, naming the ways we feel less than complete without succumbing to the seductive invitation of trying to fix ourselves right away. But like any practice, it gets easier with time. It begins with the willingness to be still with that question, what do I really deeply long for? And if we are still long enough, if we begin to hear the whispers, I want to feel loved just as I am. And we listen more deeply. I want to know that my life has meaning. I want to trust that justice and peace and healing are possible even in the face of brokenness. I want to know that I am known and seen and held by something bigger than me. At first, those whispers might feel threatening or uneasy. But as we learn to sit with them for longer and longer times without trying to push them away or to create cheap fixes for them, we begin to realize that they will not kill us. Our yearnings aren't foreign pathogens trying to infect us. They're the marrow of our bones, the regenerator of life that keeps our blood flowing. They are the impulse that keeps us alive and engaged and moving forward through the world. Without the agitating energy of yearning, without that hollow place that yearns to be fulfilled, we would have no reason to keep going. We would be static and we would die. So I want to take a few minutes now to invite you within the safe embrace of this community to spend a moment with your yearnings. If you're willing, I invite you to, BJ's going to start playing in a minute here. She's going to give us some music. And I want you to just sit and ask yourself for a second, what am I yearning for? What is the shape of that empty place inside of me? Do you feel that four-cornered pain poking into your shoulder blades or your hip bones? So listen to that whisper of yearning and write a word or a phrase on your page. These are anonymous, no names, please. When you've done, I invite you to fold it. And I would challenge you that if the thing that comes up as a yearning is a thing, to ask what's behind that and go deeper. Take a few minutes, and Josh and Barb will collect your pieces of paper in a few moments. Please stick your pens back in the bin too when they come around. I will be putting these yearnings together in my newsletter column for June. They're all anonymous, and my guess is that there are a lot of similarities. Sometimes these are yearnings about belonging. Sometimes they're yearnings about purpose and calling. Sometimes they're yearnings about health and wholeness, and they are deep and powerful. So I invite you to read that June newsletter column. I will also be publishing a list of these on the Open Circle Facebook page, where you can see them before the newsletter is published. I did this exercise in my other congregation, and I now have all of the anonymous slips of paper taped in the window of my office there. And I would invite you to print out this list of yearnings for yourselves. I have them in my office to remind me of the deep yearning that all of us have together in my congregations when we come together. I invite you to do the same thing, and that when you are thinking of this community, when you are in whatever your spiritual practice is, that you remember that we are all surrounded by this all of the time, and to hold that compassionately. As we go through this week, my friends, I challenge every single one of us to spend some time every day checking in with our yearnings. What name do we give them? Where do they live in our bodies? If we let them whisper to us without rushing to stifle their insistent voices, who are they calling us to be? The poet writes, "When she does think to consider its purpose in her life, she can say only that it aches with a single mystery, for whose answer she has long ago given up the search, since its question is a word whose name can never quite be asked. This yearning," she has concluded, "is the only function of the square, repeated again and again in each of its 4 matching angles, until, with time, she is persuaded anew that what frames it has no interest in ever making her happy. To be human is to yearn for the deep, for the meaningful, for the intangible. They are things that can never be ours, at least not permanently. And so there is no guarantee that acknowledging our yearning will lead us to happiness. But it will draw us forth, beckoning us always into deeper and deeper relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with this one wild and precious life that we have been given. In our yearnings, friends, may we remember that we were never meant to be complete. We were meant to be alive. May it be so. Blessed be, Ashe, and Amen. Our closing hymn today is number 1064, Blue Boat Home. This is